Welcome to the Director's Chair podcast. I'm your host, Basil Sharp, and with me is my co-host, Sky Boyer.
Hi, everybody.
How's it going, Sky?
It's good. The world's falling apart, but it's all good.
Yeah, but we're having a good old time here on the Director's Podcast. Just so you guys know, this podcast is all about the finer workings of filmmaking, with focus being specifically on directors. I want to give you an in-depth discussion about various types of directors and how their work has impacted the film scene as a whole. A little backstory on me. I am a film student. Have been working with video and or film in some way or another for most of my life. And yeah, I just completely love it. I'm an award-winning filmmaker. I won a student award. Anyway, Sky, how about you? What's your kind of backstory?
So I'm also a film student, though I am much less experienced than Basil. I have only been a film student for about 2 years thus far, and I have a lot of confidence to gain still from what I do. To be honest, maybe film isn't even the avenue I'm interested in. I actually just more have an interest in maybe the acting side / some stuff like that. But that's about my experience. I just like movies, really.
Ooh, how dare you? Who likes movies? Nobody. Right?
Yeah, you're right. No one likes movies anymore.
Yeah, movies are pretty dumb. But yeah, so today, our first, as the inaugural episode, we want to start with some directors from the history of film. I picked a couple of pretty famous ones you might have heard of. Hitchcock and Spielberg, two little-known directors who had a subtle influence on movies as a whole. Anyway, so let's just dive right in then to Hitchcock, shall we?
Sounds good.
Hitchcock, Alfred Hitchcock, that is, was born in 1899 London. Alfred Hitchcock would join the film industry as a title card designer at the age of 19. He made his directorial debut 6 months later with the film The Pleasure Garden in 1925. His 1929 film Blackmail was the first British talkie, meaning that it was the first movie with sound made in Britain. He went on to be recognized as a great filmmaker with his 1940 film Rebecca, which won an Academy Award for Best Picture. He then went on to define the thriller genre with hits like Vertigo, North by Northwest, and of course, Psycho. So, Sky, before we get into the read, I wanted to talk about our favorite Hitchcock films and the ones we have seen and haven't seen. Which ones, how we feel about them.
Okay.
So, if you want to go first.
So, remind me, is The Birds a Hitchcock film? I don't know
Birds?
why.
Yes, it is.
I have seen The Birds, I've seen Psycho, and I've seen Vertigo.
Nice.
Those are the three films I've seen. I think they're all very good. I do think certain aspects don't age quite as well nowadays, but I feel like that's unfortunately just how anything is. Hitchcock's films are pretty old now, or they're getting up there now. It's crazy to consider that some of his first films are going to be 100 years old.
That is weird. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, think about that.
In 5 years, his directorial debut will be 100 years old.
Isn't that insane to contemplate? Wow. It's a lot to think about, but it puts in perspective how influential he was. Because even now, like, the Psycho scene is still iconic. The one.
Which one?
Oh no, I have no idea. Only the one with the blaring. So yeah, the famous shower scene, the loud scream, the knife raised in the air, the loud blaring music. I mean, there's nothing about that scene that hasn't defined a lot of current, thriller / horror genre films nowadays. I mean, it's crazy to contemplate, but wow, yeah, it's a big deal. Not to mention Vertigo. I don't remember a lot about Vertigo, but I remember it being very good. It's been a while since I watched it.
James Stewart in Vertigo.
I think so.
And there was I don't remember a whole lot either. I just remember there was like a bunch of flashing colors at one part. And
Vertigo, get it?
Yeah.
Except that's not what Vertigo is.
I have only seen. So I'm actually, Birds. I have also seen.
I love
Psycho.
Birds. I think The Birds is
seen North by Northwest, but I don't remember a whole lot about it.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it. Unfortunately, when it comes to Hitchcock's films, I watch them as hey, I need to see these because they're important kind of film thing. I enjoyed Psycho, but I feel it's one of those cases where I do feel like I'm unfortunately part of that modern sort of filmmaking or film fan placement, because I'm like, I can appreciate the history, but I'm not as, I guess, worldly as a lot of other critics.
That's why
have
you
you.
bring your fresh perspective. A lot of the time, there's so many movies now that it's hard to kind of catch everything, but that's another topic entirely. Yeah, my favorite specifically is definitely Psycho of the Hitchcock films that I've seen. I thought that I wasn't going to like it because I was, a lot of the time with old movies, it's hard to tell, like, so I did a horror class and I saw a bunch of classic horror movies and most of them I did not enjoy. Psycho and Halloween being two standouts that I did. But like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for instance, I thought that movie was not very well made at all. I thought it had some nice elements to it, but I feel like it's more of a thing that broke ground in its time but doesn't age well. But Psycho is a meticulously crafted thriller that I think ages extremely well and really just holds up over time.
How dare you have that opinion? I know you're not a big fan of horror in general, or even the thriller genre. It's not
I like thrillers, just I think horror movies are usually not very well made.
I can definitely agree with that. But yeah, Psycho stands out as a result. It definitely has aged probably the best of his films. At least I think so.
I agree. Or the ones that we've seen.
Yeah, and Hitchcock also had I think the bigger deal though is how many interesting mechanical things he's applied to film.
Yeah,
that
he broke ground. I mean, with Psycho, he had the dolly shot, or sorry, dolly zoom, which was the first time that was ever he came up with that technique. It's when the dude's falling down the stairs and the camera moves backwards, but it looks like him in the background are disconnected. It's a very cool looking shot, and you achieve that shot by putting a camera on a dolly, pulling the dolly back, and zooming in at the same time. And so it looks like the main character, the subject of your frame, doesn't move, but the background does. It's a very cool effect.
It's a super cool thing, and it's one of those kind of shots that is very modern.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy to think that something so creative in a sort of a cinematography standpoint was utilized way back then, and we still see stuff like that today because of how pioneering it was.
And like the crazy thing too is like they didn't have these, I mean, small cameras. Like modern film cameras are big, but comparatively, like back then, there's giant rigs, and like to get any kind of movement out of these things was very hard, especially with like not having control over so many functions in the camera, and like you just had to kind of make it work.
Yeah, which making it work is one of those things that, like, as a student, I've already realized it's hard sometimes.
Yeah.
Making it work is very hard. So I guess if there's one thing I appreciate a lot about Hitchcock is it's his methodology.
Mm-hmm.
Methodology. I can't talk apparently.
His methodology.
That's not funny.
Oh,
funny
man.
joke. But his methodology is definitely by far the most notable thing that I'll take away still from his films. Whether or not you have an opinion towards his films, I mean, that's fine. Film is a subjective matter still. But, well, cinematography-wise, though, it is not.
No.
There is a difference between a beautiful shot and a terrible shot.
Yes. No, it's fascinating to me. Also, something that Psycho did, which it's groundbreaking even to this day, is they killed the main character like halfway through the movie. Which is like, I mean, spoilers.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, they kill.
No, they didn't.
Mary.
No, they didn't. What do you mean? Norman's still alive.
But that's my point, right? Like, movies don't do that. An example is funny. We were talking about the shower scene too. Is like how iconic this is. You can't have a shower scene in a movie now, and a thriller, without making people think of Psycho. For instance, I saw Invisible Man, and there's a shower scene in it, and it's not really derivative of Psycho or anything. But the entire time in my head, I'm thinking of the scene from Psycho. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's like because they're in a shower and it's a girl. Like, it's...
Yeah, you're always expecting them to ape it in some way with like, oh, or am I going to see like a shadow in the background? Or am I going to... It's weird how you're conditioned to that thanks to one film that made it everything that it is. I actually saw Psycho in my... I actually watched it as part of a school thing back in high school. I had a film is lit class. They transferred, or he talked about the concept of moving literature to film. But he brought up Psycho because he's like, Psycho is a groundbreaking film that we need to watch. You need to see it because it categorizes thrillers as how they are in the modern day, or rather, how it impacted them to get them where they are. And I thought that was a very interesting thing. I forgot the movie we followed it up with, All I remember is the movie afterward was not as good.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing. I took a horror film class, and I watched a bunch of classic horror movies, such as Psycho, Halloween,
What ones did you like?
Nosferatu.
I forget who was in Nosferatu.
I don't remember the actor's name. That's like
This is a movie.
Bram Stoker's Dracula from the 60s. I think it was
Actually,
the 60s or the 40s. It was pretty good.
I like that movie.
We watched a Frankenstein movie, like one of the first ones.
Okay.
A bunch of different movies, and some to varying degrees. Like some of them held up, some of them didn't. We watched the original King Kong. Have seen a lot of classic movies that way, and Psycho to me easily was the pinnacle of that class in my opinion. It stands like as something that has aged super well. Like I watched it and I was like, man, that's something I could see myself watching like again and again. Whereas like a lot of these other films, I'm like, oh, that was cool for the historical context, to watch King Kong, to watch Dracula, but I'm like, don't know that I'm gonna rewatch this movie anytime soon. Like they're great movies for the time, and they do hold up in certain aspects, but they're also very old.
Yeah, I get that. I get that feeling a lot. I think the thing that divides like a movie that's at least in the thriller genre, to make Psycho like as an example, the reason it holds up I think so well is because a lot of it is character driven, and it doesn't try to like be something it's not.
Yeah.
If you get what I mean by that.
I do.
A lot of thrillers or just films in general from like an earlier period of filmmaking time try to be substantial at that time, and they use it or they do it in like ways that haven't aged well. If you get where I'm coming from
like
a weird perspective.
Tron.
Yeah, like Tron. That is a great way. I know it's a weird comparison, but yeah, it's got a lot of really cool ideas, and at the time they were really cool techniques, and now they look like garbage.
Yeah, it's a difference between making something that is timeless, and the story. It's Psycho's a very simple story. It's somebody is hiding from the law, and it takes a twist, and you find the serial killer at a time when serial killer stories were not like Psycho. The movie's called Psycho, right? That this type of thing was novel at the time, and it's so done to death now, but it's not done well.
What was the year of Psycho's release again? So Psycho, bringing up kind of time frame things regarding when things were released, 1960, when this came out. Psycho really, like you said, not a lot of serial killer stories. They existed, but they weren't to this level of quality, I think, and that's the thing that separates them. As someone who is a connoisseur of very bad horror, who loves the 1920s up to the 1950s of oh man, I love this guy in a costume. It's really funny, haha. There was a lot of horror was very monster focused.
Yeah.
You had Dracula, but then you also had stuff like
Frankenstein, the thing from the Black Lagoon or whatever. What was it called?
Yeah.
You had a bunch of different, King Kong would be another.
Don't forget,
famous one.
you also had all the really, really bad science fiction ones that were Who Goes There and stuff like that before they were retake the modern era.
Yeah.
And, we had a renaissance in the science fiction genre for horror, but then Psycho is smart. It plays it safe. It talks about something that...
I wouldn't say it plays it
all right,
safe.
when I say plays it safe, I mean contextually in a universe perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Does that make sense?
It's not going crazy.
Yeah, a serial killer with a mental, I almost said disposition.
A psycho.
Yeah, a psycho. Haha, got him. But a literal psychopath. And it's believable as a result.
Yeah.
It doesn't ape itself as something that is otherworldly. It doesn't ever feel like I'm going to get to that point where I'm like, all right, when's the guy in the alien costume walking out so I can laugh at him?
Yeah. Another thing worth note on the subject of Psycho is it's the first movie, I believe Jeffrey Dahmer's his name. So there was a guy in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I know who Jeffrey Dahmer is.
Psycho was the first movie that was based off. It's inspired by Jeffrey Dahmer. Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Silence of the Lambs all were inspired by Jeffrey Dahmer.
I knew about the Silence of the Lambs one. I had no idea Psycho was in. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I can see it. As someone who knows the Jeffrey Dahmer case, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I had no idea. It's
Specifically, I believe Hitchcock was the idea that just in like rural America, you might show up at a random person's place and they might be a serial killer like that, a disturbed individual who stuffs their mother or whatever.
I really like the idea that those 3 movies are, because I actually like all 3 of those movies.
Oh yeah, they're
all 3 are very. No, you don't like. Don't say you like. You just said. You
Oh
didn't
wait,
like
no,
Texas
I was talking
Chainsaw.
all 2 because I wasn't including Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah,
Silence of the
I like all
Lambs.
3 actually, from that perspective of.
I liked the first half of Texas Chainsaw Massacre before it turns into girl running through the woods screaming for an hour.
I feel that, but it goes to show that serial killers are a very, what's the word? Relatable fear, because
Yeah,
it's
because
so
it's like-
human.
Anybody, they look like us. They talk like us. It's like, but anybody could be a sociopath. And it's not the fact that everybody is, it's the fact that anybody could be one.
I mean, think about it. This movie got followed up by American Psycho. It's not actually, but
No, it got remade in the 80s with Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates.
I don't want to think about that movie, please.
I just feel
Don't
like we should also
remind me of
mention
that. I would have rather American Psycho actually was a sequel, because I like American Psycho quite a bit, featuring what's his name?
Isn't that
the one?
Spoilers, but isn't it all in his head or whatever? Like he's not actually killing anybody.
I think so. It's been a while. I'll have to rewatch American Psycho, because that movie's good too.
Anyways,
But it goes to show, again, we're going back to the exact same topic of, hey, look, crazy people are very scary.
they're also crazy. But I think that
one might say psychotic.
Oh gosh. I think that just about wraps up our discussion of Hitchcock and the movies of his that we like. Now we are going to do a script read. This is going to be an annual part of the podcast where every director, we will read a scene from one of their famous movies. And we are going to read it as dryly as possible for everybody, so that way you can enjoy it as much as we do. We are starting with the scene where Mary meets Norman in the motel in Psycho.
All right. I will be playing Norman, and Basil will be doing Mary.
Yes.
Close up. The various birds, 2 shot. Mary and Norman. Norman.
Please, sit down on the sofa.
As Norman goes about spreading out the bread and ham and pouring the milk, we follow Mary across the room. She studies the birds as she walks, briefly examines a bookcase stacked with books on the subject of taxidermy. Close up. The books on taxidermy medium. Close shot, Mary. She notices, too, the paintings on the wall, nudes primarily, and many with a vaguely religious overtone. Finally, Mary reaches the sofa, sits down, looks at the spread. Mary.
You're very kind.
Norman.
It's all for you. I'm not hungry. Please, go ahead.
Mary begins to eat, her attitude a bit tense. She takes up a small slice of ham, bites off a tiny bite, nibbles on it in the manner of one disturbed and preoccupied. Norman gazes at her, at the tiny bite she has taken, smiles, then laughs. Norman.
You eat like a bird.
Mary.
You know, of course.
Norman.
Not really. I hear that expression that one eats like a bird is really a fallacy. I mean, a falsity? Because birds eat a tremendous lot. Oh, I don't know anything about birds. My hobby is stuffing things. Taxidermy. And I guess I'd rather stuff birds because, well, I hate the look of beasts when they're stuffed. Foxes and chimps and all. Some people even stuff dogs and cats. But I can't. I think only birds look well stuffed because they're rather passive to begin with. Most of them.
He trails off, his exuberance failing in the rushing return of his natural hesitancy and discomfort. Mary looks at him with some comprehension, then smiles. Mary.
It's a strange hobby. Curious, I mean.
Norman.
Uncommon, too.
Mary.
I imagine so.
Norman.
It's not as expensive as you'd think. Cheap, really. Needles, thread, sawdust. The chemicals are all that cost anything.
Mary.
A man should have a hobby.
Norman.
It's more than a hobby. Sometimes, a hobby is supposed to pass the time, not fill it.
Mary.
Is your time so empty?
Norman.
Oh, no. I run the office, tend the cabins and grounds, do little chores for Mother, the ones she allows I might be capable of doing.
Mary.
You go out with friends?
Norman.
Friends? Who needs friends? A boy's best friend is his mother. You've never had an empty moment in your life, have you?
Mary.
Only my share.
Norman.
Where are you going? I don't mean to pry.
Mary.
I'm looking for a private island.
Norman.
What are you running away from?
Mary.
Why do you ask that?
Norman.
People never run away from anything. The rain didn't last very long. You know what I think? I think we're all in our private traps, clamped in them, and none of us can ever climb out. We scratch and claw, but only at the air, only at each other, and for all of it, we never budge an inch.
End scene.
All right. So that was the scene from Psycho. So
yeah.
another thing I really like about Psycho is the subtle like hinting at what's going to happen with when Mary shows up at the hotel. She's like, she's worried and she's hiding because she doesn't want to get caught with the money. And Norman's like seems like this very like nice guy at first, but as she talks to him and he's like talking about taxidermy and birds and stuff and how she eats like a bird and he likes stuffing birds. It's all very like foreboding. And Mary's just like, whatever, man should have a hobby. But
Yeah, it's very foreboding that Hitchcock would go and make the birds. I don't really mean that, but it is interesting. He has a very interesting fondness for birds.
hey, birds are one of nature's great mysteries. No one knows how they fly.
It's true. Sometimes you think they have jet propulsion.
I mean,
least
how
that's
else
what I
could they
think.
fly? That's also because they're, they evolved from the dinosaurs. But that's neither here nor there.
But yeah, so I definitely get, there's a lot of subtlety and a lot of the big twists. It's weird. You can set yourself up to see them, but you won't see them still till they happen, if you get what I mean by that.
Well, that's something else to expand on is, as somebody who watched this movie, 60 years after it came out, and I knew the twist. I knew that she gets stabbed. I knew that stuff was going to happen, but I was still kind of shocked by it, which says something to the power of the filmmaking. It's one of those things where it's like a good thriller. You can know all the plot beats of a good thriller, but every time you watch it, it'll thrill you, for lack of a better word. It'll keep the tension up. It'll make you feel claustrophobic every single time. Even though it's a movie, it's fake, it's going to be okay, or whatever, this character dies, it doesn't matter.
There's a particular scene that I really, really like. It's in the later half of the film. I believe there's that detective that shows up. It's when he's climbing the stairs.
Yeah.
And you end up, I believe he falls down them.
Yeah,
correct?
that's when they do the dolly zoom.
Yeah, the dolly, that one. Yeah, that's it. That particular scene is really good still. And it's the one I come back to probably more than the shower scene, just because it's so notable, if you get what I mean by that.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it's weird how good the buildup is for something like the shower scene, where it's like, you've heard of it. There's a high chance if you're anyone ever, you've heard of it. My mom, who isn't even a big film person, or I take that back. She's a big film person for schlock.
Yeah.
She really likes bad Hallmark movies and bad horror movies. And she loves Psycho. She absolutely adores it. She can verbatim tell me every scene in the movie.
Yeah.
She loves that movie so much. And
It's so good.
she always references the shower sequence because she's like, it's really, really good. She's like, there's something so powerful about watching this character die on screen when I'm not ready for it. And she's like, it's one of the reasons why I really wish that it was given a proper shake again. And she's like, and they never do it right.
Well,
which is
yeah.
very interesting to me.
I mean, Psycho is just... I think it's an untouchable movie, honestly. It's one of those films, like Citizen Kane or whatever, where it stands out amongst its, contemporaries. So, you look at the movies from the 60s, and there's quite a few famous ones, I guess, but nothing quite like Psycho is the movie of the 60s, in my opinion. And it's how you go into the 70s, and you're like, I would say Star Wars. And then it's like these movies, I mean, even though Jaws came out in the 70s, and that's another huge movie, there's certain movies that they're so big Even though Psycho wasn't as, like, it was financially successful, but it wasn't, like, I mean, there
wasn't
weren't
a
really
blockbuster.
blockbusters in that way at the time. It's not like Gone with the Wind, which sold, everybody saw that in the entire world. But it's just,
I get what you're saying. It's like a masterclass of quality, even if it wasn't, a successful film.
Well,
it was still so ground. Like, all right. I guess what I'm saying is the success isn't the big part.
Yeah.
The bigger part is its influence.
Yeah, that's
and how quality it was. And I get that. Citizen Kane is a movie that, again, it's not fun to watch. Personally, I found it dreadfully boring.
it's very long.
It's very long. It's kind of boring, but I get it. I get why it's so good. There's a lot of really good filmmaking there. And that's the more notable part. I'm glad you brought it up. We'll talk about Spielberg in a little bit, but there's a lot of comparisons I'm going to make there. Actually, like you've said it. Psycho is a watershed moment, but not for a blockbuster filmmaking standpoint, more for a cinematography and storytelling aspect.
It's a turn in the history of filmmaking
where
you go through all the movies that inspired generations, and people will say, they'll say there's Star Wars, they'll say Alien, they'll say Citizen Kane, they'll say whatever, Lawrence of Arabia, and they'll say Psycho. And that's one of the movies that's thrown up there with all of the movies that have, like, completely influenced a specific genre or established a genre. The way, like, something like Blade Runner established the cyberpunk genre in film.
Yeah, I think Psycho is one of the first examples where a horror film, or rather a thriller, like, was effective for me.
Yeah.
I could. That's probably what I'd say, is it showcased the concept that, hey, you can take something like this and make it. It can happen, because as I mentioned earlier, I find a lot of horror from around that era very bad.
Yeah.
It's very, very derisive, very silly, very doesn't hold up well. It's hard to take it seriously when like you can tell it's a product of its time, and filmmaking has changed so much in that time frame. Not to say that there wasn't, like, good things, like good serious story-driven things, like there's a lot of them out there, or there's, like, really good, like, impactful, like, I remember one of the films I had to watch at a film class was The Best Years of Our Lives, which was about, like, a bunch of soldiers returning from World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually really, really interesting because it's talking about how horrible their lives are now.
Yeah.
And that was, like, I believe 1960? It was around the same kind of time period. And it goes to show that there are good films, but, like, the thriller genre didn't have that.
Yeah.
Didn't have that.
Well, the thriller genre almost didn't even exist then.
Yeah.
Like,
there were attempts.
That was kind of the establishing movie that made the thriller. Like, without Psycho, you don't get Silence of the Lambs. You don't get movies like...
That's really painful to think about.
Yeah,
because
what's
Silence
the
of the
David
Lambs...
Fincher one?
Zodiac.
Yeah, you don't get the Zodiac. You don't get a lot of these movies that are amazing. I would honestly say Seven and a bunch of other movies.
I was about to bring up Seven. I'm glad, because I was like, isn't Seven that, like, really, really good thriller that I would say has a huge influence on that kind of?
Good stuff. Good old Alfredi Hitchcockian.
I think he's an incredible filmmaker. I mean, there's a reason that we still call back to him constantly, especially for the genre he made.
Yeah.
It's too bad it gets dragged through the mud nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, we still see some quality thrillers coming out every now and again. I mean, I mentioned Invisible Man. That's a pretty good one. The genre continues. I mean, I don't know if you've seen Prisoners. That's a very good thriller, in my opinion. There's good ones.
I've seen a lot of bad ones, though.
Yeah.
Like, there's more bad than good nowadays.
I mean, I think you're thinking more horror specific, though.
I'm thinking both. Thrillers also have been, like, a lot of them follow the same kind of formula over and over again.
Yeah.
Something that horror has fallen into the same trap of, too. You could say this is a derisive thing of filmmaking today.
Oh, yeah.
Again, I consider Psycho, it's a thriller. It can also fall into a horror genre.
Well, you mentioned suspense, and the thing about it is a lot of the time movies, especially nowadays, they feel like that if they set up suspense in the scene, the suspense has to pay off in that scene. Whereas, like, a lot of the good suspense movies, they build suspense throughout the entire movie. So they don't give you a payoff until the end, or close to the end, or maybe halfway through, and then they start building up suspense again in a different way. Like, Psycho gives you about halfway through. That's the payoff when she dies. But there's more suspense later as they're investigating and we're figuring out what's going on, and then like you have the final payoff at the end. But that kind of attitude towards suspense now, where it's like, okay, suspense for 2 minutes, jump scare, and it's like that.
I hate that.
Oh.
It doesn't feel like you have proper build-up anymore. It doesn't feel like you're building to a crescendo that kind of starts to elucidate the situation a little bit.
Yeah.
It's something that really sucks about the genre that it's really weird to me that Hitchcock back then got it. He understood it. And now we live in an age where everyone has access to this kind of knowledge and fundamental base of information, and yet they don't get it.
Right? My goodness.
I don't know how you can fail so hard on something like that.
Well, I mean, I think there's kind of a dynamic between studios and filmmakers where studios are like, okay, we need the jump scares, and I guarantee you there's filmmakers out there who are like, who think it's the scariest thing ever, because like different people have different opinions and stuff. You know, there's nothing wrong with that, but also, no.
I feel the same way.
Like, can we not please everybody in the horror genre right now?
So,
Yeah, Psycho's a real...
It's special.
Yeah.
So is Alfred Hitchcock.
We're going to have to pull that shower curtain and cut to a short break, but we'll be back real quickly after this ad.
I could tell a highly stylized story as told by the screenwriter, and I would more adapt his style or her style in the way I would tell the story. I would serve the screenwriter, and I would be a good storyteller, but I wouldn't impose... I don't feel I have a style. But Hitchcock had a style, and Scorsese has a style, and certainly Wells had a style. But Curtiz I identify with more. People like Victor Fleming and Michael Curtiz I identify with more because they didn't have styles either. But they were chameleons, and they could quickly adapt. They could go from a story about heaven and an afterlife to the Civil War in Gone with the Wind. And they could do a lot of different subjects, and they could do them well because they were good craftsmen. And they were good with actors, and they could draw out good performances. But they didn't impose a kind of who they were on what that was. And I always, felt I was more in their game.
Welcome back to the Director's Chair podcast. For this segment, we're going to be discussing the director who was just speaking, Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg was born December 18th, 1946. He's one of the most renowned directors in the history of film. He started by directing plays and some television episodes, but would later explode onto the movie scene with a little hit called Jaws in 1975. He would then go on to create the summer blockbuster genre, with hits like E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Jurassic Park. He is now the highest grossing director of all time and has a net worth of about $3 billion. Anyway, Sky, what do you think about Spielberg?
Aw, dude, this is like... Spielberg's a great example of that sort of 70s to like modern 2000s era director who just seemed like he couldn't like stop. He just had something good like every other time. It was crazy.
Yeah.
I find him to be just incredible. Like, you brought up E.T., Jaws, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Jurassic Park. All four of those movies are great, and they hold up mostly.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you, Jaws.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
I have a lot of problems with Jaws, but the rest of these films are great. All right, actually, wait, hold on. Controversial opinion. I despise E.T. The Extraterrestrial. I hate the movie. I think it's great, but I hate it. I don't like it.
Interesting. Or do you have a dissociative identity disorder?
What do you mean?
Because you have two personalities, one that likes...
No,
E.T. and
all
one
right.
that
I
hates
meant
it?
more like it's great as in like I respect it. I respect why it's so important and why people liked it so much. I also despise it because it's just not my type of film.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think that's the problem.
It's very, it's a kid's movie.
Because of that movie, The Thing bombed. But that's neither here nor there.
That is neither here nor there. It's definitely there, and by there I mean back in the 60s or 90s, whenever that movie
I blame
came out.
E.T. for one of my favorite movies bombing in the box office. But regardless, these are all great movies. Spielberg himself is such an interesting person.
Well, something in the video that just played, Spielberg mentions that he doesn't really have a specific style the way you see from a Scorsese or a Hitchcock. Spielberg is more, I can take on any genre and do it. He's a jack of all trades, if you will.
I think that's actually really, really well thought out because you've got E.T., which is very much a kid's movie. I think the comment you made about or rather, what Spielberg himself said about himself, how he's kind of a jack of all trades, how he can touch everything. This is a great example just based on the movies we've listed already.
Yeah.
But I can give even more. You got E.T. the Extraterrestrial. It's a kid's movie. It very much is a kid's, very wholesome movie. Then you get Jaws. Jaws is a thriller. It is a thriller about a shark, of all things. And then you've got Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is an adventure film. And surprisingly, still one of the best, probably.
Oh, yeah.
Then you got Jurassic Park, which is, again, I'd say it's in this. It's sort of like a combination of Jaws meets Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, you have your sci-fi, but you also, it's a thriller with animals.
But then you've got the tour de force that is Schindler's List.
Right.
Which is a heavy, very emotional film. It is nothing like the others that we just listed. It's a movie that I do not enjoy watching.
Yeah.
It is incredible, but I feel depressed every time I watch it. It's a very powerful film, and it's so different.
Right? I mean, then you have Saving Private Ryan, a more classical style war film that really influenced the genre. I mean, it's insane to think that all of these movies, like absolutely iconic films, all came from Spielberg.
I think that's an important word, though, iconic, as opposed to groundbreaking.
Yeah.
In some ways.
I mean, and they were groundbreaking in many ways, but
but
Indiana Jones is a it's not necessarily a groundbreaking film in the sense that it's a story that's actually been told by that time. It had been told before. It's a 1930s serial about a guy, an adventuring scallywag who goes and
swashbuckling.
Exactly. These types of things had been kind of done before, but they're groundbreaking in a lot of the ways they were executed. So you get John Williams to do your score, and you're already like miles ahead of the competition. Or like Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park is the first movie to do digital effects effectively.
Yeah.
And they still hold up.
It's crazy how good the original Jurassic Park looks, and then I'll look at Jurassic World and be like, ew.
But it's weird because technically, on a technical level, the Jurassic World dinosaurs are way more detailed. They do look better on a technical level. The issue is how they're used. Jurassic Park's technology is just so impressive for the time. I mean, Jurassic World, like we were saying, it's technically like the details and the textures are better, but the way you get good-looking CGI, like realistic-looking CGI, is low light, rain, anything to kind of mask it as well as you can, and then you intersperse that with digital effects. So if I see a T-Rex in broad daylight, it doesn't look good. If I see a T-Rex in the rain at night, it looks fantastic. And that's the worst effect in the original Jurassic Park is when they first see the dinosaurs and it's the Brachiosaurus or whatever. It's a bad effect because it's in bright daylight and you can tell it's a CGI dinosaur. They helped sell it with good acting and good like the ground shaking and stuff and sound design and music, but that's the only bad effect in that film because everything else is very well hidden.
Yeah, I 100% see what you mean. A lot of Jurassic Park holds up because they knew what they were working with. They knew what looked bad, what looked good. And the entire reason that that daytime scene even happens is because they're setting it up for our protagonists.
Yes.
So that they're introduced to this situation that like, whoa, dinosaurs are real now?
Yeah. And I think
what's happening?
I think it's important to note that like it's whenever the story demands that the dinosaurs be scary, they look more real. Like they use actual Velociraptor costumes for the parts when they were in the kitchen because that's scarier when you can see like the actual foot. Well, it's like they're hiding from it, and it's just the more real you can make it feel, the more scary it is. But if you don't need to be scared of Brachiosaur, and then they do the next thing later in the movie, they use for the head of the Brachiosaur an actual giant prop head of a dinosaur. Like that kind of stuff you just don't see anymore. Like even if they do use physical stuff nowadays, they just CGI over the physical stuff. So it's like the teeth and the whatever will be physical, and then everything else is just a CGI dinosaur.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've seen effects like that too often where like they just CGI over things instead of treat them with the respect that they deserve, aka using actual props or like models and yada yada yada. I don't get why that's such a hard thing to do. I actually want to bring up, it's funny, a lot of Spielberg's films are very hopeful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like positivity, and one of the films that like makes me think of that immediately is one that you didn't list here. I'm pretty upset. It's a really good movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh yeah.
Very hopeful movie.
Right?
It's weird because it's literally a movie that could have become Independence Day when you think about it.
Yeah.
Think that's an interesting comparison to make. But Close Encounters is a movie about hope. It's a movie about how two kinds of species can come together and reach an understanding.
Yeah.
Especially that conclusion. It's really good. I really like Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the few times where, like, I guess on the podcast, this is an interesting thing for everyone to know. I have a deathly fear of aliens.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I hate them. They're like, something about them freaks me out. Like, especially that kind from Close Encounters. The kind of, like, typical spindly kind of
Abduction.
Yeah, I hate it. You know what? Close Encounters, I don't mind. I don't mind it because I'm like, it's hope. It's got that something different there.
Yeah, like these aren't aliens that are come to destroy our planet or take over or anything.
No, they're here to
explore. They're whatever.
Yeah, and there's something about that immediately told me, wow, Spielberg, you could have turned this into a horror movie.
Yeah.
You guys chose not to do that. You wanted to tell a story that was positive. And that's something that I noticed with E.T. as well.
Have you heard of the movie War Horse?
Yes.
I believe that's a Spielberg film.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very
believe so.
very positive film.
Yeah.
Saving Private Ryan, it's sad, but it ends with kind of like a very like they saved Private Ryan. Spoilers.
I mean, Schindler's List is literally about Schindler being like, he does his best.
Yeah.
He's trying, and like there's a good message in there,
yeah.
But it's also talking about the horrors of the situation.
Have you seen Lincoln?
Was that the
Abraham Lincoln, Daniel Day-Lewis movie?
Yeah, I don't remember anything about it.
Yeah,
All
I've
I
never
recall
seen
is
it.
I went to see it and then I was bored.
It seemed like it would be boring. That's the thing. I do think that Spielberg's had kind of a dip in the last 10 years. His movies have kind of just
What do you mean?
felt very uninspired.
What do you mean? I absolutely adore Ready Player One.
Yeah, and Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and all this. I don't know. I think at a certain point,
I don't expect a director to be constantly good. I feel like we all have low points.
Right,
Any
and
human being does.
when somebody puts out as many hits and does as much for the industry as he has, like, you can't help but just appreciate what he's done and respect it. And then it's like, yeah, everybody's allowed to have an off day. It's all right if you make Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, as long as you already made two amazing ones and one decent one that we can always love.
All right, I was gonna say, don't write off. I was worried you were gonna write off Temple of Doom entirely because I think Temple of Doom has some good things in it.
But we're gonna discuss Indiana Jones after our scene read for the Spielberg segment. We're gonna be reading a scene from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It's the Last Crusade, everybody.
The Last Crusade?
No sooner does Indy get to his feet than a vase comes crashing down on the back of his head. Stunned, Indy sinks to one knee, and Indy's father, Professor Henry Jones, steps out of the shadows. Henry.
Junior?
Indy gets to his feet. Indy, a reflex.
Yes, sir.
This reply is a knee-jerk reaction on Indy's part. Now they look at each other. Henry.
It is you, Junior.
Indy, an old familiar irritation.
Don't call me that, please.
Henry, amazed.
But what are you doing here?
Indy.
I came to get you. What do you think?
Nazi voices are heard, approaching. Indy and Henry press themselves against the wall, Henry still holding the broken vase in his hand. Indy steps to the window and looks down. Henry moves to the lamp, holding the vase under the light for a closer look. Henry.
Late 14th century Ming Dynasty.
Henry is all about the broken vase, which he still holds in his hand. Father and son get onto cross lines for a couple of moments. Henry.
Oh, it breaks the heart.
Indy, quietly to himself.
And the head. You hit me, Dad.
Henry, referring to the vase.
I'll never forgive myself.
Indy, surprised misunderstanding.
Don't worry, I'm fine.
Henry.
Thank God.
Henry has clearly been concentrating entirely on the vase. He is examining the broken end carefully. Henry.
It's fake. See, you can tell by the cross-section.
Henry throws the vase against the wall where it shatters. Indy.
No, Dad, get your stuff. We've got to get out of here.
Henry.
Well, I am sorry about your head, though. But I thought you were one of them.
Indy.
Dad, they come in through the doors.
Henry laughs.
Good point.
End scene.
So yeah, that was one of my favorite scenes from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. We're gonna now kind of dive into the Indiana Jones movies as a franchise and kind of like how we feel about them.
Yeah.
Sky, if you would like to kick this off.
Yeah, you got it. I really like Crystal Skull.
Oh gosh.
Crystal Skull is my
okay,
favorite.
podcast
Indiana-
canceled. We're done.
All right, but in seriousness, Last Crusade is my favorite one. So this scene in particular is really good, actually. It's kind of weird reading it like verbatim like that.
Yeah.
Changes this entirely to be like I have no idea what's going on all of a sudden because of the way it's
very. A lot of it's carried out through the acting. Something that
acting and the scene itself. Just reading it, I have like it's interesting that like I don't get the full vibe of the situation.
No man, it's almost like we don't have Sean Connery and Harrison Ford with us.
Sean Harrison and Ford Connery.
Yes, exactly. I'll go first, but let's rank the Indiana Jones movies from our
Okay.
personal opinions, just so people know where we're coming
Personal opinions.
from. It's a very hard one to choose between, for me, as the best one between the Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Last Crusade. Both of those movies are peak Indiana Jones. Honestly, do you want to? Actually, no, I got it. I'm
waiting.
gonna say Raiders of the Lost Ark is my favorite
Okay.
by such a small percentage. So then Last Crusade, then Temple of Doom, then Crystal
I
Skull.
was hoping you put Crystal Skull and Temple of Doom to be the weird outlier here, and I would have been like, what? Yeah, mine's basically the same list except move Last Crusade up.
Yeah.
Put Last Crusade first, and then Raiders, and then Temple of Doom, and then Crystal Skull. Mind you, I would probably put Temple of Doom like way above Crystal Skull. By the way.
Oh
Like,
yeah, no, there's a
big
gap there. But I also would put it a decent amount below the other two.
Yeah, it's because Temple of Doom is a weird movie.
It is a very weird.
It's
movie.
weird, yet then you get weirder and you get significantly less good when you get to Crystal Skull.
Oh yeah,
Crystal Skull has like, all right. So I want to rep on Crystal Skull for a sec. You have a decent cast. You've got an idea that I think is. I actually think the Crystal Skull is a very interesting topic, and like the thing I like about Indiana Jones is each of these is interesting. You've got the Ark of the Covenant. Super interesting topic. There's a lot of fun adventures you could have there, especially with the I love the Nazis as recurring villains in this. And are they the villains also in
Last
the
Crusade?
Yeah, in
Raiders of the Ark. Last.
I was thinking of who was in Crystal Skull. It's the Russians, right?
Yeah.
I like that too, by the way.
Yeah, that fits.
There's a lot of things in Crystal Skull that should work. The Russians are awesome. I'm glad that they went with that to give you kind of that Cold War era kind of like that. That's so cool. I think that would have worked. It doesn't.
No.
Because they didn't do it right at all, and I don't know why. And then you got the situation with the Crystal Skull itself. Interesting. Crystal Skulls are a modern day legend to this day that I find very interesting. No one understands what's the deal with them.
Yeah.
And aliens.
Well, so
Isn't it interdimensional beings or some nonsense now?
so I want to give some backstory on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Oh, do you got some?
Yeah, I got some a hot take.
All
Or
right.
actually, more of a fresh news story. It happened a couple weeks ago. But so Spielberg, Lucas, and Harrison Ford all wanted to make like 3 more Indiana Jones movies during the 90s. They wanted to just keep making them after The Last Crusade. But they would only make a new Indiana Jones if they all 3 could agree on a script. Now, after Last Crusade, Lucas just wanted to do Aliens. And Spielberg and Harrison Ford did not want to do Aliens. So they fought about this for years. And then finally they compromised and called them interdimensional beings. So they technically weren't aliens. And that's what got Spielberg
So
on
you know
it.
what I'm learning here? I'm learning that I don't like Lucas at all. Because he just seems like he doesn't know anything sometimes.
I mean, here's the weird thing is, in the 50s,
Okay.
all right, and this is like devil's advocate, but in the 50s, the big, like, the thing people that were, like, conspiracy about, and it was all aliens. So it fits the timeline. Like, it makes sense from a timeline to be like, oh, aliens would be the thing. Like, in the 30s, it was religious artifacts and stuff. Hitler was all about that garbage.
Yeah, he was all about that mysticism and that.
Yeah, he was like, let's make the swastika our logo.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. It does work timeline wise. I think the problem is like a lot of the execution.
Oh,
though.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
A lot of it is like weird and it doesn't.
Well, there's one scene specifically that I think is peak Indiana Jones and is the most Indiana Jones scene in that movie. It's when Mutt and Indy go to the grave when they first get the Crystal Skull. That scene is all practically done on, and it's very it's got that very pulpy feel to it. You got these goofy guys to fight, jumping around, shooting blow darts. And then there's some actually good humor in that scene. But then we go to the jungle and there's a giant saw jumping all over the place. Shia LaBeouf is swinging through CGI vines with CGI monkeys, and there's ants that are
and then you got the whole chase sequence that's really long
and doesn't make sense. In reality, it could not happen.
Yeah,
you contrast that with the chase scene from Indiana Jones: Raiders of the Lost Ark. Right, he's on the chase scene with the horse in the car, and he does that actual stunt where he slides underneath the car, and it's so much more exciting.
Not to mention you have some really peak comedy in, notably I think Last Crusade has some funnier jokes.
Oh, I agree. Absolutely.
I think it's the more entertaining hilarity aspect of the three of the films.
The dynamic between Henry and Indiana Jones, it's so entertaining. And just watching them go back and forth.
It's weird to say that I think that's why Last Crusade is my favorite, because I find that those interactions way more meaningful than the ones he has in Raiders.
Oh yeah.
Not to say that doesn't make them good in Raiders. I'm just saying that they have a less personal kind of thing.
Raiders is the perfect introduction
to the
adventure film.
Yeah.
And without Raiders, you can't really have I don't think Last Crusade works as well. I mean, they do give you the backstory at the beginning of the movie, so it does work as a standalone. But you're not as endeared to Indiana Jones unless you've seen the first movie or the first two.
Yeah, I 100% believe that. Whereas then you have Temple of Doom that doesn't really feel like any of them.
Yeah, interesting fact. Temple of Doom is a prequel.
I can see it. I know that sounds weird. The only part you and I have talked about this before, that it doesn't make sense from there's mysticism, yet he denies mysticism in
even though he's seen it with
Raiders.
his own eyes after being possessed and seeing hearts be ripped out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know about that part, but I can see the other aspects of it being a prequel.
From a character standpoint, he's definitely more immature in Temple of Doom. He's more brash. He's less intelligent. He's less respectful of others. He's very much... you can tell he's a younger, more immature Indiana Jones. So it makes sense that his character would go from that. Temple of Doom somehow managed to do... It's such a weird movie that it's a prequel that comes in as the middle movie. It's so weird. But
I feel if they had been more explicit that it was a prequel...
Yeah, well, they do say, in the beginning it says 1935, and in Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark it says 1936.
Yeah, but still.
I know, that's the only thing that tells
the audience is going to read that, and they'll be like, oh, it's before. But your brain won't process that
not
because you're not
You're not thinking about that.
And from a storytelling standpoint, it doesn't do that great a job besides characterizing Indy as being a little more brash.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not evident. But then I will say that Last Crusade then fixes all that.
Oh, yeah.
Even later, he's really wised up, even though he falls for the exact same thing as his dad, which is really funny to me. I absolutely love that dynamic. Yeah, oh, it's a great joke. Come on.
She talks in her sleep.
I love everything about Last Crusade. Oh, God, there's just so much. There's so many good jokes in Last Crusade.
I do want to say something else about Temple of Doom as well. I think the biggest issue with Temple of Doom is the pacing.
Yeah.
The movie is very, the last third of it almost has no story progression. It's just action. And action is great in these movies for the most part. And even in the Temple of Doom, it has some good action, but there's a certain point in the third act that I was like, okay, get to the point. You're just fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting at this point. I want to see some story.
I really like that you bring that up because think about this. We had a scene, we had a scene in Raiders where you think you're going to get an entire fight scene, and instead you get none of that.
That's when he shoots the guy?
Yeah. The guy's twirling his sword, he's being all dramatic, and you're like, this guy's in serious business. And he just pulls out his gun and shoots him.
Very commonly known fact, that was improv.
And it's great.
I know.
It's hilarious.
It's so good.
Isn't there a rumor that there might be a new one on the way?
It's actually been confirmed that they're making a new one, although Spielberg is not directing.
What?
Spielberg stepped down, and supposedly James Mangold is got to be directing, the director of Ford v Ferrari and Logan.
I have mixed feelings on that.
I
I know that everyone loves Logan. I love Logan, and you've told.
If you love him, why don't you marry him?
All right, podcast canceled. I'm decided to step down as co-host. I'm gonna let my buddy George Lucas take over.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. No, anyways, as you were saying about James Mangold taking over, your thoughts on that?
That's a shame. I don't feel like it's gonna have the same feeling. I mean, here's the thing: it depends on the direction they take it. But Indiana Jones has had this consistent kind of vibe, if you get what I mean. This consistent like atmosphere, this fun adventure. Woohoo! We're having a great time.
I guess so. I'll say this: it wasn't gonna have the same feeling regardless. The dude's 70 or 80.
Oh no, absolutely.
Like, I kind of would rather have an old man Indiana Jones movie where he's all crotchety and he can barely adventure and he has one last thing. Maybe he dies at the end.
Maybe he doesn't die and he just retires officially.
No, Indiana Jones would never retire. He's too. I mean, he was doing it in his 60s or whatever. He might as well just live out his life.
Yeah, that's fair. But I there's a spirit of adventure that I feel like Spielberg, like, he tried to capture in Crystal Skull too, if you get what I mean by that.
Yeah.
It wasn't executed well, obviously.
And there are parts where you feel it coming through.
Yeah, like you can feel that there's still that kind of like desire to have that fun adventure spirit. And I think that that's the thing that concerns me about a new director taking over is, will they capture that spirit but still tell a meaningful story regarding an older Indiana Jones?
Speaking of Spielberg,
unless they just decide to do young Indy.
Have you seen Tintin?
I've not.
So that's actually an interesting movie. I think
that also directed by Spielberg?
It was. And it really does capture that Indiana Jones spirit. And they were supposed to make more of them, but that kind of fell through because of The Hobbit and a bunch of other stuff. Yeah. Any final words on Indiana Jones, Sky?
Well, it's a good series. It's definitely got two movies that aren't as good as the other two. But, I mean, you know, when you have 4 films, it's hard to have every single one be good. Yeah. I can't think of a series that hasn't had, like, multiple films that dip a lot.
I think some people would say Toy Story. I absolutely love the Indiana Jones movies.
Yeah, same.
They're good stuff, good movies, good entertainment value, movies, kids value, entertainment, money, bucks.
Whoa. So Spielberg, the man's got a lot of, I forgot to make this comparison, but you know how we were talking about Psycho versus...
Yeah.
So Psycho was a watershed moment for directing and all that.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up Jaws because Jaws is a thriller as well.
It is.
But Jaws became a watershed for the genre in a different way.
As it made money.
It made money, and it made sequels, and it made this whole like summer block. It had a huge impact on the concept of blockbusters.
Yep.
And that is a double-edged sword right there. Blockbusters are super cool. They make money. And we've seen great examples of blockbusters that are both
good.
They are good. They are well thought out. They're interesting.
But for every one of those, we see a Jaws 4.
Yeah, for every Jaws, we see The Meg, which was made for a audience that is not us.
Anyways.
It's made for an international market.
Yes.
So I guess my end thing is, I think I like Spielberg a lot. He's really, really good. But interesting enough, despite how much good he's done, he's also done bad when you think about it.
I think he should retire. I think he's at that point. It's like, Steve, you did a good job. You had an amazing run. Nobody's going to top the amount of money you've made. So just take your billions, go on your private island, hide from the coronavirus, and retire.
That's when Spielberg's like, no, I've got to make a coronavirus movie.
Oh, man, that's his next big hit.
Oh, jeez, it's going to be Close Encounters of the Corona.
Anyways, well, speaking of The Last Crusade, that's all for this episode of the Director's Chair podcast.